Imagine stepping into the pristine, stainless steel kitchen of a modern cruise ship, where everything sparkles under bright LED lights, where every surface can be sanitized at the touch of a button, where temperature-controlled ovens and refrigeration units ensure perfect food safety. Now contrast that gleaming vision of culinary perfection with the reality of cooking aboard an 18th-century pirate ship, a weathered iron pot suspended over flickering flames on a deck made entirely of bone-dry wood, surrounded by barrels of gunpowder, coils of tar-soaked rope, and casks of highly flammable rum. This isn't just a dramatic comparison for effect. It's the stark reality that's defined one of the most dangerous and overlooked aspects of pirate life. When we think about the perils that pirates faced, our minds immediately jump to naval battles, storms, disease, and the ever-present threat of the hangman's noose. But there was another enemy that stalked every pirate crew with relentless persistence: the constant risk of fire that came with the simple act of preparing their daily meals. Picture this scenario. You're aboard a wooden vessel that's essentially a floating tinderbox, packed with every combustible material known to man. The deck beneath your feet is made of timber that's been baking under the tropical sun for months, dried to the point where it would ignite at the smallest spark. Below deck, you have barrels of gunpowder that could blow the entire ship to smithereens, coils of rope soaked in flammable tar, and casks of rum with alcohol content high enough to fuel the flames of hell itself. Now imagine that in the middle of this floating bomb, you need to light a fire every single day to cook food for 30, 40, or even 50 hungry pirates. This was the reality that pirate cooks faced every single day, and it required a level of skill, caution, and sheer courage that would make modern chefs weep with terror. Cooking on a pirate ship wasn't just about preparing food. It was about managing one of the most dangerous activities that could be undertaken aboard a wooden vessel. An activity that could transform a successful pirate crew into charred corpses floating on the ocean in a matter of minutes. The challenge wasn't just the fire itself, but everything that came with it. These ships were constantly moving, rolling with the waves, pitching forward and backward as they cut through ocean swells. Imagine trying to manage an open flame and boiling liquids while the entire kitchen is tilting back and forth, sometimes at angles that would send pots and pans flying across the deck like projectiles. Add to this the cramped conditions, the lack of proper ventilation, the absence of running water for cleaning or emergency fire suppression, and the presence of dozens of armed, often drunk, and frequently ill-tempered pirates. And you begin to understand why the ship's cook was often considered one of the most valuable and respected members of any pirate crew. But the challenges went far beyond just managing fire safety. These cooks had to work with ingredients that would challenge even the most creative modern chef. Salt pork, so hard it could be used as building material, hardtack biscuits infested with weevils and maggots, water so contaminated it was barely fit for cleaning, let alone cooking, and a pantry that consisted of whatever could be stolen, scavenged, or purchased with blood money in the lawless ports that welcomed pirate crews. They had to create something approaching edible meals using tools that were primitive even by the standards of their era. Cast iron pots that weighed more than most modern appliances, knives that were often repurposed weapons, and cooking fires that had to be managed without the benefit of temperature controls, timers, or any of the safety equipment that we take for granted in modern kitchens. Today, we're going to explore this fascinating and dangerous world of pirate cooking, examining how these maritime criminals managed to feed themselves while sailing wooden ships across dangerous seas, we'll discover the ingenious solutions they developed for cooking safely on vessels that were essentially floating fire hazards. Learn about the specialized equipment and techniques that made meal preparation possible under impossible conditions. And understand how the simple act of making dinner became a daily battle against physics, chemistry, and the ever-present threat of catastrophic fire. You'll learn about the brave men who served as ship's cooks, often pirates who had been injured in battle or were too old for combat, but whose culinary skills were worth their weight in gold to hungry crews. We'll explore the makeshift galleys where these meals were prepared, examine the primitive but effective cooking equipment that made it all possible, and discover how the daily routine of feeding a pirate crew shaped every aspect of life aboard these legendary vessels. By the end of this journey, you'll never again be able to watch a pirate movie featuring elaborate shipboard feasts without thinking about the incredible skill, courage, and ingenuity required to make even the simplest meal possible on a wooden ship filled with enough combustible materials to power a small war. The heart of any pirate ship's food preparation wasn't a kitchen in any sense that we would recognize today, but rather a carefully designed area that prioritized safety above all other considerations. This wasn't about culinary convenience or efficiency. It was about creating a space where fire could be managed without turning the entire vessel into a floating funeral pyre. The centerpiece of this makeshift kitchen was what sailors called the galley stove, though calling it a stove was generous. This was essentially a large, sturdy box constructed from brick, stone, and iron, designed to contain fire while protecting everything around it from sparks, embers, and radiant heat. The construction of these fireboxes was both an art and a science, requiring materials and techniques that could mean the difference between a hot meal and a watery grave. The base of the galley stove was typically constructed on a thick bed of sand, gravel, or small stones, materials that served multiple crucial purposes. This mineral foundation provided insulation, protecting the wooden deck below from the intense heat generated by the cooking fire. But more importantly, it served as a heat sink, absorbing and distributing thermal energy to prevent any single point from becoming hot enough to ignite the surrounding wood. The walls of the firebox were built from whatever heat-resistant materials could be acquired, salvaged, or stolen during the crew's adventures. Bricks were preferred when available, as they provided excellent insulation and could withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking. However, bricks were expensive and heavy, making them luxury items that not all pirate crews could afford or accommodate. More commonly, pirate ships used a combination of flat stones, clay, and scrap metal to construct their fireboxes. Beach stones were particularly valued because they had been naturally selected by wave action to withstand thermal stress, while clay could be molded to fill gaps and create a more airtight combustion chamber. Scrap iron and copper, often salvaged from captured ships or purchased from corrupt suppliers, provided additional heat resistance and helped reflect thermal energy away from combustible materials. The design of these galley stoves had to account for the constant motion of the ship, which created unique challenges that land-based cooks never had to consider. The firebox needed to be low and wide rather than tall and narrow, providing a stable base that wouldn't tip over when the ship rolled in heavy seas. The sides had to be high enough to contain flames and embers even when the vessel was pitching at steep angles, but not so high that they interfered with cooking operations or blocked ventilation. Ventilation was perhaps the most critical aspect of galley stove design, requiring a delicate balance between safety and functionality. The firebox needed enough airflow to maintain a proper fire for cooking, but not so much that sparks and embers could be blown around the ship. Many pirate vessels used simple chimney systems made from salvaged metal pipes or even improvised materials, like hollowed-out wooden barrels lined with clay or metal sheeting. These chimney systems had to be designed to work regardless of wind direction or ship orientation, a significant engineering challenge for men who had little formal education in physics or engineering. The most successful designs used a combination of baffles, dampers, and wind-driven ventilation systems that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining safe operation. The location of the galley stove was chosen with extreme care, requiring consideration of multiple factors that could mean the difference between successful meal preparation and catastrophic fire. The ideal location needed to be accessible to the cook during meal preparation, protected from wind and weather, isolated from the most combustible materials on the ship, and positioned to allow for rapid evacuation or fire suppression if something went wrong. Most pirate ships placed their galley stoves on the main deck, where they would have maximum ventilation and where any fire could be quickly spotted and addressed by the crew. However, deck placement also exposed the cooking area to weather, wind, and enemy fire during combat, creating additional challenges that had to be managed through careful planning and operational procedures. Some larger pirate vessels had the luxury of dedicated galley spaces below deck, typically located near the center of the ship, where motion was minimized and where the cooking area could be better protected from weather and combat. However, below-deck galleys required more sophisticated ventilation systems and created greater risks if fires did start, as smoke and flames could quickly spread throughout the confined spaces below deck. The area immediately surrounding the galley stove was carefully prepared to minimize fire risk and maximize operational efficiency. Wooden surfaces were often covered with sheets of metal, wet canvas, or layers of sand to prevent ignition from flying sparks or spilled coals. Water barrels were strategically positioned for both cooking purposes and emergency fire suppression, while sand buckets provided another line of defense against accidental fires. Fuel storage and management represented another critical aspect of galley operations that required constant attention and careful planning. Wood was the primary fuel for pirate cooking fires, but obtaining and storing adequate supplies of dry firewood presented significant challenges for crews that might spend months at sea without touching land. The quality of firewood was crucial for successful cooking operations, requiring wood that would burn hot and clean while producing minimal smoke and sparks. Hardwoods like oak, maple, and hickory were preferred when available, as they provided steady, long-lasting fires that were ideal for the slow cooking methods that dominated pirate cuisine. However, such premium fuels were often difficult to obtain and expensive to purchase, forcing many crews to make do with whatever combustible materials they could find. Softwoods like pine and fir burned quickly and produced excessive smoke and sparks, making them dangerous for shipboard use. However, they were often easier to obtain and could serve as kindling for starting fires or for cooking operations that required quick, high heat. The resinous nature of these woods also made them valuable for waterproofing and maintenance purposes, giving them multiple uses aboard pirate vessels. Driftwood and salvaged timber from captured ships provided additional fuel sources that cost nothing, but required careful evaluation before use. Some types of salvaged wood contained metal fittings, paint, or other materials that could produce toxic fumes or dangerous sparks when burned. Experienced cooks learned to identify safe burning materials and to prepare them properly for use in cooking fires. Coal was occasionally available in ports that served mining regions, and it provided several advantages over wood for shipboard cooking. Coal burned hotter and longer than wood, produced less smoke, and was much more compact, allowing ships to carry larger fuel supplies in smaller spaces. However, coal was expensive, difficult to ignite, and produced intense heat that required different cooking techniques and equipment. Some pirate crews became creative in their fuel acquisition, using everything from furniture and spare lumber to enemy ship components and even books and papers when desperate situations required immediate cooking fuel. However, such improvised fuels often burned poorly and could produce dangerous or toxic fumes, making them last resort options that were used only when traditional fuels were unavailable. The storage of cooking fuel required as much planning and care as its acquisition, as improperly stored wood could become a fire hazard that was worse than having no fuel at all. Firewood had to be kept dry to burn properly, but it also had to be stored away from the galley stove and other heat sources to prevent accidental ignition. Many ships used dedicated fuel storage areas that were lined with metal or stone and equipped with tight-fitting covers to protect wood from moisture while containing any accidental fires. The most critical member of any pirate cooking operation was the ship's cook, a position that required a unique combination of culinary skill, fire management, expertise, physical courage, and the ability to work under pressure that would challenge even the most experienced modern chefs. This wasn't a job for the weak-willed or inexperienced. It was a position that could determine whether the crew ate well or starved, whether the ship continued sailing or burned to the waterline. Pirate cooks came from diverse backgrounds, but they shared certain characteristics that made them valuable beyond their ability to prepare food. Many were former merchant sailors who had learned cooking skills during years of legitimate service, bringing professional experience and proven techniques to their new criminal careers. Others were ex-soldiers who had served as camp cooks during military campaigns, men who understood how to feed large groups under difficult conditions while managing the logistics of fuel, water, and ingredient procurement. Some pirate cooks were former tavern keepers or professional cooks who had turned to piracy after losing their businesses, or seeking better opportunities than what legitimate employment could provide. These men brought formal culinary training and knowledge of food preparation techniques that could transform even the worst ship's provisions into something approaching edible meals. Perhaps most commonly, pirate cooks were experienced crew members who had been injured in battle or were too old for the physical demands of sailing and combat, but whose experience and knowledge made them too valuable to abandon. A grizzled veteran who had lost a leg in a naval battle might find new purpose as the ship's cook, using decades of maritime experience to solve the unique challenges of shipboard food preparation. The physical demands of serving as a pirate ship's cook were extraordinary, requiring strength, agility, and endurance that would challenge athletes. Imagine trying to manage heavy cast iron pots and pans while the deck beneath your feet is constantly moving, sometimes at angles steep enough to make walking difficult. Add to this the need to work near an open fire, while wearing the heavy clothing required for protection from burns and sparks, and you begin to understand the physical toll that cooking took on these men. The cook had to be able to lift and maneuver cooking equipment that weighed dozens of pounds, often while the ship was rolling in heavy seas. A large pot filled with stew for 40 pirates could weigh well over 100 pounds, and moving such equipment safely required not just strength, but also perfect timing and balance. One mistake could result in serious burns, wasted food, or fires that could destroy the entire ship. Mental toughness was equally important, as pirate cooks had to work under constant pressure while making decisions that could have life or death consequences. They had to judge weather conditions to determine whether cooking was safe. manage fuel supplies to ensure adequate heating while avoiding waste, and maintain food safety standards with limited resources and primitive equipment. The cook also had to navigate the complex social dynamics of pirate crews, men who were often armed, frequently drunk, and sometimes violently disagreeable about food quality or portion sizes. A diplomatic cook who could satisfy crew expectations while managing limited resources was worth his weight in gold, while a cook who could handle crew relations might find himself abandoned at the next port or worse. Fire management skills were perhaps the most critical expertise that pirate cooks needed to master, requiring knowledge that went far beyond simple cooking techniques. These men had to understand how different types of wood burned, how wind conditions affected fire behavior, how to maintain consistent cooking temperatures without modern controls, and most importantly, how to prevent and respond to cooking fires that could threaten the entire vessel. Experienced pirate cooks developed an almost supernatural ability to read weather conditions and predict how they would affect cooking operations. They learned to recognize wind patterns that would make fire management difficult, to identify atmospheric conditions that increased fire risk, and to time their cooking activities to minimize danger while ensuring that the crew received adequate nutrition. The cook was also responsible for training other crew members in basic fire safety and emergency response procedures. In the event of a cooking fire, every second counted, and the cook needed to know that his shipmates would respond quickly and effectively to contain the blaze before it could spread beyond the galley area. Perhaps most challenging of all, pirate cooks had to maintain their skills and effectiveness while dealing with the same terrible diet and health problems that affected the rest of the crew. They were subject to the same nutritional deficiencies, the same exposure to contaminated food and water, and the same diseases that weakened other crew members, yet they had to continue performing physically and mentally demanding work that required peak performance. The tools and equipment available to pirate cooks were primitive by any standard, requiring ingenuity and skill to produce anything approaching appetizing meals. These weren't precision instruments designed for culinary excellence. They were crude, heavy, and often improvised tools that prioritized durability and functionality over convenience or efficiency. The foundation of any pirate galley was the collection of cast-iron cookware that formed the backbone of meal preparation operations. Cast-iron pots and pans were preferred not because they were easy to use, but because they could withstand the brutal conditions aboard pirate ships, while providing even heat distribution and excellent durability. These pieces were incredibly heavy. A large cooking pot could weigh 30 or 40 pounds, even when empty, but they were virtually indestructible, and could last for decades with proper care. The most important piece of equipment was typically the largest pot available, often with a capacity of 5 to 10 gallons or more. This massive vessel was used to prepare the communal stews and soups that formed the backbone of pirate nutrition, allowing cooks to prepare large quantities of food efficiently, while conserving fuel and cooking time. These pots were often suspended over the fire using chains or hooks, allowing cooks to adjust cooking height to control temperature and prevent burning. Smaller pots and pans provided flexibility for preparing different types of dishes or for cooking, when only small amounts of fuel were available. However, even small cookware aboard pirate ships was substantial by modern standards. As everything had to be built to withstand the harsh conditions and rough handling that were inevitable parts of maritime life, cast iron skillets and frying pans were used for preparing foods that required higher heat or direct contact with cooking surfaces. These pieces were particularly valuable for cooking fresh fish when available. for rendering fat from salt pork, or for preparing hardtack and other grain-based foods that benefited from browning or crisping. The maintenance of cast iron cookware was a constant challenge that required specialized knowledge and careful attention. Salt air and constant exposure to moisture meant that rust was an ever-present threat, requiring regular seasoning and careful drying after each use. Cooks had to understand how to prevent rust formation, how to remove rust when it appeared, and how to maintain the seasoning layers that made cast iron cookware effective for cooking. Cleaning cast iron equipment without modern detergents or adequate fresh water required creative solutions and careful technique. Sand was often used as an abrasive for removing food residues, while salt could serve as both cleanser and rust preventive. Some cooks learned to use the natural acids in certain foods to help clean and season their equipment, turning meal preparation into equipment maintenance opportunities. Knives and cutting implements aboard pirate ships were often repurposed weapons or tools that had been adapted for culinary use. A pirate cook might use a cutlass that had been shortened and resharpened for food preparation, a boarding axe that doubled as a meat cleaver, or a sailor's knife that served multiple purposes, including food preparation, rope cutting, and self-defense. The quality of cutting tools varied enormously depending on what individual crews could acquire, afford, or steal during their adventures. Some cooks were fortunate enough to have access to properly designed kitchen knives that had been taken from captured merchant vessels or purchased in ports that catered to legitimate shipping. Others had to make do with crude implements that made food preparation much more difficult and time-consuming. Maintaining sharp edges on cutting tools was a constant challenge that required specialized skills and equipment. Whetstones were valuable commodities that had to be protected from damage and loss, while the knowledge of proper sharpening techniques was often closely guarded by those who possessed it. A cook who could keep his knives sharp was far more effective and safer than one who had to work with dull blades that required dangerous amounts of force to cut through tough materials. The absence of specialized kitchen tools meant that pirate cooks had to be creative in adapting general-purpose equipment for food preparation tasks. Marlin's pikes might be used for stirring or serving, while wooden buckets could serve as mixing bowls or temporary food storage containers. Anything that could be cleaned and would uncontaminate food became a potential kitchen tool in the hands of a resourceful cook. Measuring and timing equipment was virtually non-existent aboard most pirate ships, requiring cooks to develop intuitive skills for determining quantities, cooking times, and temperatures. Experienced cooks learned to judge portion sizes by eye, to estimate cooking times by observing fire conditions and food appearance, and to determine doneness through techniques that relied on all their senses rather than mechanical instruments. Some of the most ingenious innovations in pirate cooking equipment came from the need to secure everything against the constant motion of the ship. Pots and pans had to be designed or modified to prevent them from sliding across cooking surfaces or falling from their supports during rough weather. This led to the development of specialized hooks, chains, and brackets that could hold cooking equipment securely, while still allowing cooks to access and manipulate their tools. Fiddles, raised edges around cooking surfaces, became standard equipment for preventing ingredients and cooking utensils from sliding overboard during meal preparation. These simple wooden or metal barriers made it possible to prepare food even when the ship was rolling significantly, though they required cooks to adapt their techniques to work within confined spaces. The daily routine of meal preparation aboard pirate ships was dictated by a complex set of factors that included weather conditions, ship operations, fuel availability, ingredient supplies, and crew needs. This wasn't simply a matter of deciding what to cook and when. It was a carefully orchestrated operation that had to balance nutritional requirements against safety concerns while working within the constraints of primitive equipment and hostile environment. The typical day began before dawn, when the cook would assess conditions and begin preparations for the crew's first meal. This early start was necessary because every aspect of cooking took much longer than it would on land. From gathering and preparing fuel to lighting fires and bringing large quantities of liquid to cooking temperature. A simple stew that might take an hour to prepare in a modern kitchen could require 3 or 4 hours of work aboard a pirate ship. Weather evaluation was the first and most critical task each morning, as conditions could make cooking impossible or extremely dangerous. High winds could fan cooking fires out of control or make it impossible to maintain consistent heat. Rain could extinguish fires or make fuel too wet to burn properly. Rough seas could make it dangerous to work with hot liquids or open flames, potentially forcing the crew to subsist on cold rations until conditions improved. The cook had to understand how changing weather would affect every aspect of meal preparation, from fuel consumption rates to cooking times to food safety considerations. A storm that was still hours away might require immediate changes to cooking plans, while improving conditions might allow for more elaborate meal preparation than had been possible in previous days. Fuel preparation was typically the second task of the day, as proper fire management required dry, properly prepared wood that would burn cleanly and safely. The cook had to select appropriate fuel based on the cooking tasks planned for the day, prepare kindling and larger pieces for sustained burning, and ensure that adequate supplies were available for the entire cooking process. This fuel preparation often involved splitting larger pieces of wood, arranging them for proper air circulation, and sometimes treating them with oil or other combustible materials to improve ignition characteristics. The cook also had to consider fuel conservation, as running out of cooking fuel during a long voyage could force the crew to eat cold food for extended periods. Fire lighting and management required skills that few modern people possess, as there were no matches, lighters, or other convenient ignition sources available to pirate cooks. Fire had to be started using flint and steel, tinder, and carefully prepared kindling, a process that could take significant time and effort under the best conditions and might be nearly impossible in wet or windy weather. Once a fire was established, maintaining it at proper cooking temperatures required constant attention and adjustment. The cook had to understand how different types of fuel burned, how to adjust airflow to control heat output, and how to add fuel without disrupting cooking operations or creating dangerous flare-ups. The preparation of ingredients was often the most time-consuming part of meal preparation, as everything had to be done by hand using primitive tools. Salt meat had to be soaked, cut, and sometimes pounded to make it edible. Hardtack had to be broken up and often soaked to soften it enough for consumption. Any vegetables or grains that were available had to be cleaned, chopped, and prepared for cooking. This ingredient preparation often revealed the true state of the ship's food supplies, as cooks had to remove insects, mold, and other contamination before food could be used. The process of cleaning weevil-infested hardtack or cutting away spoiled portions of salt meat was a daily reminder of the challenging conditions under which pirates lived. The actual cooking process required careful timing and coordination to ensure that all components of a meal were ready simultaneously while making efficient use of limited fuel and cooking space. The cook had to plan cooking sequences that maximized the use of available heat, often preparing multiple dishes using the same fire and adjusting cooking methods based on changing fuel conditions. Large communal stews were the backbone of pirate cuisine because they made efficient use of fuel while providing hot, filling meals for entire crews. These one-pot meals combined whatever ingredients were available: salt, meat, hardtack, dried vegetables, grains, or anything else that could add nutrition or flavor to the mix. The cook's skill in seasoning and combining these ingredients could mean the difference between a meal that sustained morale and one that depressed it further. The challenges of cooking during rough weather created some of the most dangerous and demanding conditions that pirate cooks faced. High seas could make it impossible to maintain stable cooking fires, while the constant motion of the ship turned every cooking operation into a potential disaster. Pots had to be secured with ropes and chains to prevent them from sliding across the deck or overturning, while cooks had to develop specialized techniques for working safely with hot liquids and open flames, while the deck rolled beneath their feet. Some experienced cooks became legendary for their ability to prepare hot meals even in terrible weather conditions. They developed techniques for banking fires to maintain heat with minimal fuel, for securing cooking equipment against the most violent ship motion, and for timing their cooking operations to take advantage of brief periods of relative calm. During the most severe weather, cooking became impossible, forcing crews to subsist on cold rations that provided minimal nutrition and no psychological comfort. These periods tested both the cook's ability to preserve food for emergency consumption and the crew's patience with their circumstances. The distribution of prepared food presented its own challenges, as hot meals had to be served quickly before they cooled, while ensuring that every crew member received fair portions. This required organizational skills and often diplomatic abilities, as disputes over food distribution could quickly escalate into serious conflicts among armed and often hungry men. The cook typically served as both preparer and distributor of meals, which gave him significant power within the crew hierarchy. A fair and competent cook could command respect and loyalty that extended far beyond his formal position, while an incompetent or unfair cook could become a source of serious crew discord. The daily routine of cooking also included planning for future meals, maintaining equipment, managing food storage, and coordinating with other crew members who might be responsible for procuring ingredients through fishing, hunting, or trading. This forward-thinking approach was essential for ensuring that the crew remained adequately fed throughout long voyages or extended periods without resupply opportunities. The dangers associated with cooking aboard wooden pirate ships extended far beyond the obvious fire hazards, encompassing a complex web of risks that could threaten individual cooks, entire crews, and the vessels themselves. Understanding these dangers helps explain why ship's cooks were so highly valued and why successful pirate crews invested so much effort in developing safe cooking procedures and emergency response protocols. Fire remained the most obvious and devastating threat, capable of transforming a successful pirate crew into charred corpses floating on the ocean within minutes. The risk wasn't just from major conflagrations that could consume entire ships, but also from smaller fires that could damage equipment, destroy food supplies, or force crews to abandon cooking operations at critical times. Cooking fires could spread in numerous ways that modern people rarely consider. Flying sparks could ignite clothing, rigging, or deck materials that had been dried by constant sun exposure. Overheated cooking equipment could set fire to surrounding wooden surfaces through radiant heat alone. Spilled cooking oil or grease could create fire paths that allowed flames to spread rapidly across deck surfaces. The confined spaces aboard pirate ships meant that even small fires could quickly become major emergencies. If they were uncontrolled immediately, Smoke could fill lower decks and make them uninhabitable, while flames could spread through rigging and sails faster than crews could respond. The presence of gunpowder stores meant that any fire had the potential to cause explosions that could destroy ships instantaneously. Wind conditions created additional fire hazards that could turn routine cooking operations into disasters. Strong winds could blow flames and sparks in unexpected directions, making it difficult to predict and control fire spread. Changing wind directions could alter the behavior of cooking fires without warning, potentially overwhelming fire management systems that had been adequate under previous conditions. The response to cooking fires required immediate action and perfect coordination among crew members who might be scattered throughout the ship performing other duties. Firefighting equipment had to be positioned strategically around cooking areas, with water, sand, and wet canvas readily available for suppressing flames. However, the limited quantity of fresh water aboard most pirate ships meant that fire suppression efforts had to be carefully balanced against other water needs. Some pirate crews developed sophisticated fire response procedures that assigned specific roles to different crew members, ensuring rapid and effective response to cooking emergencies. These procedures had to be practiced regularly to ensure that all crew members could perform their assigned tasks, even under the stress and confusion of an actual emergency. Explosions represented an even more catastrophic threat than fires, as pirate ships carried numerous materials that could detonate with devastating effect. Gunpowder was the most obvious explosive hazard, but rum and other high-proof alcohol could also contribute to explosive fires under the right conditions. The combination of open flames, combustible materials, and confined spaces created conditions where small incidents could escalate into ship-destroying explosions. The location of cooking areas relative to gunpowder storage was a critical safety consideration that influenced ship design and operational procedures. Most pirate vessels attempted to position their galley areas as far as possible from powder magazines, but the limited space aboard ships meant that complete separation was rarely possible. This required careful procedures for managing both cooking and gunpowder handling operations to minimize the risk of catastrophic interactions. Some explosions aboard pirate ships were caused by the improper storage or handling of cooking fuels and supplies, rather than by direct fire spread. Poorly ventilated storage areas could accumulate flammable vapors that could ignite without warning, while improperly stored fuel could create fire hazards that persisted long after cooking operations had ended. The health hazards associated with pirate cooking extended beyond fire and explosion risks to include numerous threats that could sicken or kill crew members through more subtle mechanisms. Smoke inhalation was a constant concern for cooks who worked near open fires for hours each day, often in poorly ventilated spaces that allowed toxic fumes to accumulate. The primitive ventilation systems aboard most pirate ships meant that cooking smoke often filled living spaces below deck, creating respiratory problems for entire crews. Some types of fuel produced particularly toxic smoke that could cause immediate health problems or contribute to long-term respiratory diseases that shortened sailors' lives. Carbon monoxide poisoning was an invisible threat that could strike without warning when cooking fires burned inefficiently, or when ventilation systems failed to remove combustion gases properly. The symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, headaches, confusion, and fatigue, were often attributed to other causes, allowing the poisoning to progress to potentially fatal levels before being recognized. Burns and scalds were routine occupational hazards for pirate cooks, who had to work with open flames, hot metals, and boiling liquids, while the ship's motion made every operation unpredictable. Minor burns were so common that they were barely worth mentioning. But serious burns could disable cooks and force crews to rely on less experienced personnel for meal preparation. The treatment of cooking-related injuries was complicated by the limited medical knowledge and supplies available aboard pirate ships. Burns had to be treated with whatever materials were available, often using techniques that were ineffective or actually harmful. Serious burns could become infected and lead to disability or death, making injury prevention a critical aspect of safe cooking operations. Sanitation problems created additional health risks that were exacerbated by the challenges of maintaining cleanliness in cooking areas. The lack of adequate fresh water for cleaning meant that cooking equipment and surfaces could harbor dangerous bacteria that caused food poisoning and other illnesses. The warm, moist conditions in cooking areas provided ideal environments for bacterial growth that could contaminate food and sicken entire crews. The absence of refrigeration meant that food safety depended entirely on proper cooking techniques and careful timing of meal preparation and consumption. Foods that were allowed to cool and sit at room temperature could become dangerous within hours, particularly in tropical climates where bacterial growth was accelerated by high temperatures and humidity. Cross-contamination between raw and cooked foods was virtually impossible to prevent with the primitive equipment and limited space available for food preparation. Cooks had to use the same cutting surfaces, utensils, and storage containers for different types of food, creating numerous opportunities for dangerous bacteria to spread from contaminated ingredients to otherwise safe foods. The psychological stress associated with cooking under such dangerous conditions also took its toll on ship's cooks, who had to maintain focus and make critical decisions while knowing that mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. The constant awareness that any error could result in fire, explosion, injury, or death created mental pressure that could affect judgment and performance over time. Some cooks developed what would now be recognized as anxiety disorders related to their work, becoming overly cautious to the point where they couldn't function effectively, or conversely becoming reckless as they tried to cope with the stress of their position. The isolation that often came with being responsible for such critical and dangerous work could also contribute to mental health problems that affected both individual cooks and crew morale. The economic consequences of cooking accidents could be devastating for pirate crews, as fires or explosions could destroy not just ships but also all the equipment, supplies, and treasure that crews had worked months or years to accumulate. A single cooking accident could transform wealthy pirates into destitute castaways, assuming they survived the incident at all. The loss of cooking capability could force crews to abandon profitable operations and seek emergency resupply, often at unfavorable terms that consumed their resources and exposed them to capture or attack. Ships that lost their cooking equipment might have to rely on cold rations for extended periods, leading to health problems and morale issues that could cripple their effectiveness as fighting forces. The replacement of cooking equipment and supplies was often difficult and expensive for pirate crews, who couldn't simply order new equipment from legitimate suppliers. They had to steal, salvage, or purchase replacement items through black market channels that were often unreliable and expensive. Despite all these challenges and dangers, pirate crews continued to cook hot meals aboard their vessels because the alternatives were even worse. Cold rations provided inadequate nutrition and offered no psychological comfort to men living under extraordinarily stressful conditions. The social and morale benefits of hot, communal meals were considered essential for maintaining crew cohesion and effectiveness. making the risks of cooking acceptable compared to the certain problems that would result from abandoning cooking operations entirely. The reality of pirate cooking stands in stark contrast to the romanticized images that popular culture has created and perpetuated for generations. While movies and television shows might depict pirates enjoying elaborate feasts in comfortable shipboard dining areas, the truth was far more grim and challenging than anything Hollywood has ever portrayed. The daily struggle to prepare safe, nutritious meals aboard wooden ships filled with combustible materials required extraordinary skill, courage, and dedication from men who were already living under some of the most difficult conditions imaginable. These were unjolly adventures in maritime cuisine. They were desperate efforts to maintain basic human needs while managing risks that could destroy everything they had worked to achieve. The contrast between reality and myth becomes even more striking when we consider the social and cultural impact that these cooking challenges had on pirate communities. The shared experience of eating meals prepared under such dangerous and difficult conditions created bonds between crew members that went far beyond simple professional relationships. Men who had watched their cook risked his life daily to provide hot meals, who had helped fight cooking fires or assisted with meal preparation during emergencies, developed a level of mutual respect and interdependence that was rarely found in other occupations. The ship's cook often became a central figure in crew social dynamics, not just because he controlled food distribution, but because his daily work demonstrated the kind of courage and skill that pirates valued most highly. A cook who could prepare decent meals under impossible conditions, who could maintain his composure while working next to open flames on a rolling deck, and who could innovate solutions to equipment failures or supply shortages, earned respect that transcended formal rank or position. This respect translated into practical benefits for skilled cooks, who often enjoyed privileges and protections that were unavailable to other crew members. They might receive larger shares of captured treasure, better sleeping quarters, or exemptions from other dangerous duties. Some cooks became so valuable that they were specifically recruited by competing crews or retained even when other crew members were dismissed or abandoned. The democratic principles that governed many pirate crews extended to cooking operations in ways that reflected the life and death importance of food preparation, cooking procedures, food distribution policies, and even menu decisions were often subject to crew votes or discussions, giving ordinary pirates a voice in decisions that directly affected their survival and well-being. These democratic food policies could become quite detailed, specifying how different types of ingredients should be distributed, what constituted fair portions for crew members with different roles and responsibilities, and how disputes over food quality or distribution should be resolved. Some crews developed elaborate systems for rotating cooking duties or for sharing cooking-related responsibilities among multiple crew members. The influence of cooking challenges on pirate culture extended to their interactions with other ships and coastal communities. Pirates often evaluated potential targets based on their food supplies and cooking capabilities, rather than just their monetary value. A ship carrying fresh livestock, quality cooking equipment, or skilled cooks might be more attractive than one loaded with gold, but lacking in culinary resources. Similarly, pirate relationships with coastal settlements were often influenced by food and cooking considerations. Communities that could provide fresh ingredients, cooking supplies, or safe harbor for meal preparation might receive more favorable treatment than those that offered only monetary rewards. Some settlements developed specialized relationships with pirate crews, providing cooking services or ingredients in exchange for protection or favorable trading terms. The seasonal and geographic patterns of pirate activity were also influenced by cooking and food considerations, in ways that shaped the broader history of piracy. Regions with abundant food sources and cooking materials attracted pirate activity, while areas with limited resources were often avoided regardless of their other attractions. The Caribbean became a pirate haven partly because its tropical climate provided year-round opportunities for outdoor cooking, while its abundant marine life and tropical fruits offered alternatives to ships' provisions. The seasonal availability of turtle eggs, fresh fish, and tropical fruits influenced when and where pirates chose to operate, creating predictable patterns that were as much about nutrition as navigation. The technological innovations that pirates developed for safe cooking under extreme conditions had lasting impacts that extended far beyond the pirate community. Many of the fire safety procedures, cooking techniques, and equipment modifications that pirates pioneered were later adopted by legitimate naval forces, merchant vessels, and even land-based operations that faced similar challenges. The galley stove designs that pirates perfected through trial and error became the foundation for ship cooking systems that were used by navies and merchant fleets for generations. The fire suppression techniques, emergency procedures, and safety protocols that pirate crews developed through bitter experience saved countless lives aboard non-pirate vessels that adopted similar practices. Some of the most innovative cooking techniques developed by pirates were driven by their need to maximize nutrition, while minimizing cooking time and fuel consumption. These efficiency innovations helped establish cooking methods that were later refined and adopted by military forces, exploration expeditions, and other groups that needed to prepare meals under challenging conditions with limited resources. The preservation and storage techniques that pirates developed for managing ingredients and prepared foods also contributed to broader advances in food science and maritime logistics. Pirates were often forced to innovate new methods for keeping food safe and edible during extended voyages, leading to discoveries about food preservation that had applications far beyond criminal maritime activities. The psychological and social functions of communal cooking aboard pirate ships created cultural practices that influenced how maritime communities approached food, hospitality, and social cohesion. The tradition of sharing meals as a way of building trust and solidarity became embedded in maritime culture and extended to interactions between different crews, relationships with coastal communities, and even negotiations with captured vessels. The ritual aspects of meal preparation and consumption aboard pirate ships served functions that went beyond simple nutrition, providing structure, routine, and shared experiences that helped maintain crew morale and identity during long voyages and dangerous operations. These rituals became part of pirate cultural identity and were maintained even when practical circumstances made them difficult or dangerous. The economic implications of cooking operations aboard pirate ships were enormous, affecting everything from crew recruitment and retention to operational planning and resource allocation. Crews that could maintain effective cooking operations had significant advantages over those that couldn't, as better-fed pirates were more effective fighters, more loyal crew members, and more capable of enduring the hardships that pirate life entailed. The costs associated with cooking equipment, fuel, and supplies represented major budget items for pirate crews, requiring careful planning and resource management to ensure that cooking operations could be maintained throughout extended voyages. These costs had to be balanced against other expenses like weapons, ammunition, and ship maintenance, creating complex financial decisions that could determine whether crews succeeded or failed. The revenue potential of captured cooking equipment, supplies, and skilled cooks could sometimes exceed the value of more obvious treasures like gold or silver. A captured ship with excellent cooking facilities might be kept and used as a flagship, while captured cooks might be recruited or coerced into joining pirate crews regardless of their personal preferences. The insurance and risk management aspects of pirate cooking operations were handled through informal but sophisticated systems that distributed risks and rewards among crew members. Crews that suffered cooking-related losses might receive compensation from communal funds, while successful cooking operations that contributed to crew health and morale might result in bonuses or other rewards for responsible cooks. The legal and regulatory implications of pirate cooking operations were minimal, as pirates operated outside legitimate legal systems and were subject only to their own internal rules and procedures. However, the informal legal systems that governed pirate crews often included detailed provisions related to cooking operations, food distribution, and the resolution of food-related disputes. These internal legal systems reflected the critical importance of cooking operations to crew survival and success, with penalties for food theft, sabotage of cooking equipment, or interference with cooking operations often being severe. Some crews treated deliberate damage to cooking equipment or supplies as seriously as theft of treasure or weapons. Recognizing that such actions could threaten the survival of the entire crew, the training and knowledge transfer systems that pirates developed for cooking skills were necessarily informal but often quite effective. Experienced cooks took on apprentices or assistants, who learned through direct observation and participation rather than formal instruction. This hands-on training approach was well suited to the practical nature of shipboard cooking and helped ensure that cooking knowledge was preserved and passed on to new generations of pirates. The gender dynamics of pirate cooking were complex, as most pirate crews were exclusively male, but cooking was traditionally considered women's work in the broader society. This created interesting cultural adaptations, where male pirates had to take on roles and develop skills that were typically associated with female domestic responsibilities. Some male cooks became quite skilled and took pride in their cooking abilities, developing reputations that extended far beyond their immediate crews. These men often challenged traditional gender stereotypes and created new models for masculine identity that incorporated caregiving and domestic skills alongside more traditional pirate virtues like courage and fighting ability. The rare instances of female pirates or female crew members often involved women who had particular skills in cooking or food management, as these abilities were so valuable that they could overcome the general prejudice against women aboard pirate ships. Some women found opportunities in pirate crews that weren't available to them in legitimate society, using their domestic skills as entry points into criminal maritime careers. The environmental impact of pirate cooking operations was generally minimal compared to land-based cooking activities, but it created interesting interactions between pirate crews and the natural environments where they operated. Pirates had to understand local ecosystems well enough to identify safe sources of fuel, water, and supplementary ingredients, making them unintentional naturalists and environmental observers. The waste management challenges associated with pirate cooking were solved through simple expedients like throwing scraps overboard. But this created ecological impacts that were sometimes significant in areas with heavy pirate activity. Some bays and anchorages frequented by pirates developed altered marine ecosystems due to the regular disposal of food waste and cooking byproducts. The seasonal and weather-dependent nature of cooking operations meant that pirates became expert meteorologists and oceanographers, developing detailed knowledge of wind patterns, storm systems, and seasonal changes that affected their ability to prepare meals safely. This environmental knowledge often proved valuable for navigation and operational planning beyond just cooking considerations. The medical and health implications of pirate cooking extended far beyond basic nutrition to encompass complex interactions between diet, cooking methods, and the diseases that plagued maritime populations. The techniques that pirates used for food preparation could either mitigate or exacerbate health problems, making cooking skills crucial for crew medical management. The limited understanding of food, safety, and nutrition during the pirate era meant that cooks often had to rely on traditional knowledge, superstition, and trial-and-error experimentation to determine safe and effective cooking practices. Some of these traditional practices were surprisingly effective, while others were harmless but useless, and still others were actually dangerous. The development of scurvy prevention and treatment through dietary modifications was partly driven by the observations of experienced pirate cooks, who noticed connections between certain foods and crew health. While they didn't understand the scientific mechanisms involved, some cooks learned to identify and prioritize foods that helped prevent or treat nutritional deficiency diseases. The international and cross-cultural aspects of pirate cooking reflected the diverse backgrounds of pirate crews and the global nature of their operations. Pirates encountered cooking techniques, ingredients, and food traditions from around the world, leading to innovative fusion cuisines that combined elements from European, African, American, and Asian culinary traditions. This cultural mixing created unique food traditions that were distinctly pirate in character, combining ingredients and techniques that would never have been brought together in legitimate society. Some of these hybrid cooking styles influenced the development of regional cuisines in areas with heavy pirate activity, contributing to the culinary diversity that characterizes many Caribbean and coastal communities. The language and terminology associated with pirate cooking operations created a specialized vocabulary that reflected both the technical requirements of shipboard cooking and the cultural values of pirate communities. Terms for cooking equipment, techniques, and food preparations often had multiple meanings that reflected the interconnected nature of cooking and other shipboard activities. This specialized language helped create and maintain pirate cultural identity, while facilitating communication among crew members who might come from very different backgrounds and speak different native languages. The common vocabulary of cooking operations provided a shared reference point that helped integrate diverse crew members into cohesive working units. The artistic and creative aspects of pirate cooking were often overlooked, but represented important elements of cultural expression and personal identity within pirate communities. Cooks who could create appealing meals from terrible ingredients were practicing a form of folk art that was highly valued by their communities, even if it wasn't recognized as such by outside observers. The decorative and ceremonial aspects of food presentation, even under the primitive conditions aboard pirate ships, reflected human needs for beauty and ritual that persisted even in the harsh environment of criminal maritime activity. Special meals for celebrations, holidays, or significant events might involve extra effort in preparation and presentation that went beyond simple nutritional requirements. The competitive aspects of pirate cooking created informal contests and comparisons between different cooks and crews, leading to innovations and improvements in cooking techniques and food quality. Cooks might compete for reputation and status by attempting to create superior meals from identical ingredients, driving improvements in cooking skills and techniques. The educational and intellectual aspects of pirate cooking required cooks to master complex bodies of knowledge that encompassed chemistry, physics, biology, meteorology, and human psychology. While they wouldn't have described their knowledge in these terms, successful pirate cooks were applied scientists who understood how different variables affected their cooking operations and outcomes. The problem-solving and innovation requirements of pirate cooking created opportunities for intellectual development and creative expression that might not have been available to these men in legitimate society. Some cooks developed sophisticated understanding of food science, equipment design, and process optimization that rivaled formally educated professionals. The documentation and record-keeping aspects of pirate cooking operations were generally informal, but sometimes quite detailed, as successful cooks needed to track fuel consumption, ingredient usage, equipment maintenance, and crew preferences to maintain effective operations. These records, when they survived, provide valuable insights into the daily life and operational practices of pirate crews. The strategic and tactical implications of cooking operations influenced pirate decision-making at every level, from daily operational choices to long-term strategic planning. The need to maintain cooking capability shaped decisions about ship selection, crew recruitment, route planning, and resource allocation in ways that affected the overall success or failure of pirate operations. The legacy and historical significance of pirate cooking practices extended far beyond their immediate practical applications. To influence broader developments in maritime technology, food science, and cultural evolution. The innovations and adaptations that pirates developed out of necessity contributed to knowledge bases that benefited legitimate maritime activities and land-based applications. Understanding the reality of pirate cooking helps us appreciate both the incredible hardships that these men endured and the remarkable ingenuity they displayed in adapting to impossible circumstances. Every hot meal that a pirate crew enjoyed represented a small victory against enormous odds, a triumph of human resourcefulness over hostile environment and primitive technology. The next time you see a movie depicting pirates enjoying a leisurely meal aboard their ship, remember the reality behind the romance. Those scenes of casual dining represent hours of dangerous preparation by skilled men working under conditions that would challenge modern professional chefs equipped with the finest contemporary equipment and safety systems. The pirate cook stirring his pot over an open flame on a rolling deck was onto just preparing food. He was managing one of the most dangerous operations aboard a ship filled with armed, desperate men, and enough combustible materials to create an explosion visible for miles. Every meal was an exercise in courage. Every day of successful cooking was a testament to skill and determination that few people have ever been called upon to demonstrate. The story of how pirates cooked aboard their wooden ships is ultimately a story about human adaptability, courage, and the lengths to which people will go to maintain dignity and community even under the most challenging circumstances. These men found ways to create warmth, nourishment, and social connection in an environment that seemed designed to prevent all three. Using nothing but primitive tools, dangerous techniques, and an unshakable determination to survive and thrive despite impossible odds. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of pirate cooking is what it reveals about the fundamental human need for comfort, community, and care, even among people who had chosen to live outside society's rules and protections. The effort that these crews put into cooking hot meals, sharing food equitably, and maintaining cooking operations despite constant dangers demonstrates that even the most hardened criminals retained essential human values that transcended their circumstances. In the end, the story of pirate cooking reminds us that behind every legend lies a human reality filled with daily struggles, small victories, and the persistent effort to maintain humanity in the face of dehumanizing conditions. The pirate cook, working over his dangerous fire, wasn't just preparing a meal. He was preserving civilization itself, one pot of stew at a time, ensuring that his crew remained not just alive, but recognizably human, despite everything that their chosen lifestyle demanded of them.